Welcome to Leadership Explored, the podcast where we dive into what it really means to lead in today's world. I'm Ed Schaefer, joined as always by my co-host Andy Siegmund. In our last episode, we talked about how companies execute layoffs and why the digital walk of shame is such a massive failure of leadership. But today, we are flipping the script. Today is all about you. Getting laid off is a shock to the system. 1 minute you're in a meeting, and 5 minutes later your laptop is bricked. Your identity, your routine, and your financial security are suddenly completely up in the air. The natural human instinct in that moment is to panic. You want to immediately sign whatever severance paperwork they put in front of you, blast out an emotional post on LinkedIn, and apply to 50 random jobs on Indeed before dinner. But acting out of panic is the worst thing you can do. So today, we're talking about the immediate triage of losing your job. We'll discuss why you need to go to the movies instead of applying for jobs, how to build your job search council, and the exact strategy to get your leverage back. So Andy, we've both been through this. We've found out we were getting laid off and we weren't going to have a job anymore. So when you get that information and the reality starts to set in, what is the very first emotion that hits you?
Personally, it's a combination of all of them, right? It's fear, it's frustration, it's you're kind of hit with that uncertainty, right? What am I going to do next? How am I going to pay my mortgage? How long am I going to be unemployed? How do I find a job, right? There's a whole rash of things that hit you right out of the gate, and I think that that's normal too, right? Like just kind of you have to acknowledge like your job is a significant portion of your life, and I'm sure we'll talk later as to how attached you should be to it from an identity point of view. But you spend a lot of time at work, and when that thing goes away, you're going to go through all the different phases of grief, right? There's a lot that's going on there, and we need to acknowledge that like this is a really significant inflection point for anyone who experiences it.
Yeah. I mean, I know for me, it was shock for sure. And I don't know if panic, I don't know if I went quite to panic, but definitely, uh, you're surprised and you're not necessarily prepared for it or ready to go, ready to deal with it. So it's like, um, everything that you had planned or that you thought you were going to be working on is now upended. Like the rug was pulled out from under you and you have to completely
Mhm.
shift your frame and your perspective. And, I know in that case, I think it was like I came in that day thinking, oh, I've got this meeting I've got to do and like follow up on this and make sure that this, thing for this other person is moving forward or whatever. But after you get that news, it's kind of like none of those things matter, but also you might still have some responsibility to take care of those things. So for me, I definitely was in a bit of a like, almost like a freeze. What's going on? I needed to take it all in and process it to really have any sense of what was going on.
Yeah, and not to mention the future looking part of it too, right? So like there's the 6 inches in front of your nose where you're thinking, okay, this is what I had to do today, but it's not uncommon to be thinking months down the line of like, oh, I just booked this vacation, or I just ordered new furniture, like starting to immediately thinking about like where you can trim fat from your household budget because all of a sudden, there's going to be a major shock to the system there. Yeah, it's a lot of information to process at once, and hopefully, we can give some folks some systems and some heuristics to work through that and move from chaos into a plan and a coherent strategy to get back on your feet.
Yeah. Well, I guess with that, let's move in and let's start with the immediate aftermath, like the first 48 hours after you get the news. And I guess I kind of think of this time period, or maybe even 72 hours. I kind of think of it as almost like triage and decompression. And I think something that I have noticed, I almost was tempted to do this myself, and I noticed this in a lot of people that we know who have been laid off or had to go through that in recent years. I think one of the biggest mistakes that a person can make is defensive job searching, right? It's really tempting when you get that news to switch gears and like jump on LinkedIn jobs or Indeed or something, some job board immediately and start looking for jobs and trying to apply to them and getting as many applications out as you can because the thought process is you want to get your pipeline set up and going, and you can't have a pipeline if you don't start doing it. And I think it also it gives you some sort of sense of control. It's like a semblance of something that you can control in this situation. But I think this is a dangerous thing to be doing, because when you're especially in that first 48 to 72 hours, your brain is basically in a trauma response mode. And first of all, I think you need to do your basic triage. If you still have access into your systems, you need to be making sure you're backing up your whatever personal information you can take with you. But more importantly, you need to secure your HR info, like HR contact
Mhm.
info. You need to figure out how to access like your ADP or your pay stubs, because a lot of time that stuff is behind the company firewall, and tax information may be there as well. And you need all that stuff. You need to make sure that you can still access it if your account gets shut down. And you need to make sure you understand your severance details if you have any, and what the implications are. But you shouldn't, I don't think you should sign anything like immediately, unless you know for sure that you're just going to be happy to take whatever they offer you. You probably need to take a little bit of time at least to process and think about it. But I would say, those are the key things, like secure your HR info, figure out how to access your pay stubs and your tax info so you have that information, and make sure you know how to get your severance details. That's what you should do in that first 24, 48, 72 hours. And besides that, in my opinion, I think you need to just stop. Like don't go apply for jobs, don't post on your network, don't reach out to people. Maybe a couple of like really close connections, it might be okay to
Mhm.
start doing that. But I think that you should go to the movies, or go out and get drinks with a friend, or hang out with your kids, or play a video game, or whatever. Like just go for a
Walk your
long
dog.
walk.
Yeah.
Yeah, something so that you can decompress. Because if you react while you're flooded and your cortisol is high, and you're stressed out and you have a lot of anxiety, it's going to cloud your judgment. It's going to be harder to figure out what to do, and you're basically going to stay in panic mode if you put yourself in that defensive, let's start going right away, and you won't be able to think as clearly. So, I guess, what do you think about that? And to that end too, I think there's a weird sense of shame or embarrassment when people get laid off. So, did you feel the urge to hide it or to share it immediately? And what did you do in the first, 40, 48, or 72 hours?
Yeah. So, I've been through this process a handful of times. If you're in the technology sector, I think that this like you need to acknowledge that this is part of the risk of working in that space, right? I I've seen some of the most competent people I know get caught in rifts. I've seen folks who should have been fired get caught in rifts too, right? Which is to say that like this is spans pretty wide as far as like the risk profile for folks are. And I know later we'll talk about like ways that you can shore up your own kind of infrastructure to lessen that risk, or at least give you larger leverage. So I won't dive into that immediately. Um, One of the things that I think is really worth thinking about here is one, like how do you react in that first 48, 72 hours or whatever, and two, what does the urgency really really look like, and then three, what doors might you be accidentally closing by working from a place of like freak out reactivity. So to kind of kick things off, realistically, if you've ever been on the hiring manager side of things, or you've ever applied for a role, you're probably talking 6 to 8 weeks, best case scenario, from starting a job search to landing a new role, right? When you're applying for roles, broadly speaking, there is like a significant advantage to being in like the top quintile, quartile of applicants as far as like timing is concerned. So you have the role is posted at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. If you're applying for that role at 10:30 on a Tuesday, that's more advantageous than at 5:30 that following Friday, right? Just because of like for most of those applicant management systems are going to go through applicants from first application to last. So, first person in the door has a bit of an advantage, proverbial first person in the door. So there is a little bit of that, but also recognize that like these are long hiring cycles, broadly speaking. Applying for stuff, like if you got laid off 5 minutes ago and you're applying for stuff now, you feel like you're moving the ball down the field. But if you don't have all of your systems set up, if you were not already prepared to be applying for a job, you're not putting your best foot forward, right? You haven't, built out your resume like the marketing document that it's supposed to be, which, spoiler alert, your resume is not a comprehensive list of the things that you've done. It is a marketing document for the problem that you're trying to solve for any given organization. This is a hill that I will die on, Ed, because that's what it's there. Its job is to get you the interview, and the interview is to parse out whether or not you can do the job. Another thing that's worth thinking about too is as far as like mistakes that you can make in this is like if you are, let's use my archetype, right? I am a through and through thoroughbred professional services person. Most of my roles have been at large corporations. So let's just like narrow that down to Fortune 500 companies, right? So most of my career has been in Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 software companies in that professional services role. That means that there's probably a couple of hundred companies out there that I could realistically work for if I were to like shoot that as the lens that I'm shooting at. Then it's narrow that down to how many actually have job openings that are at the right level, comp level, experience level, et cetera, for me. Every shot that I fire on one of those, if I'm not putting my best foot forward, I'm eroding any sort of follow-up, right? So if I apply for a job at, Ed Incorporated, which is my mythical, Fortune 500 software company.
Fortune number one out there, actually.
Fortune 1, yeah, it's a Fortune 1 software company. And I don't put my best foot forward and I don't get a response. Maybe I applied for a suboptimal role for me, and then I see a more optimal role and I put together. The first thing that recruiter is going to ask is, why does this person keep on applying to Ed Incorporated, right? And that becomes another question that you have to ask, or they might misread your tenacity as desperation or as like an unfocused search, which can hurt you further down the line and erode your ability to get a role at a certain job.
When you were with the panic, like if you panic apply to that job with a less than ideal resume, or if you haven't, like you said, prepared your systems, then you might be identified as unqualified and get put into a list where then future applications that are more role appropriate, or maybe you put a lot more effort into it, it could not just like it could actually cause you to not be considered for those roles based on how the applicant like the candidate systems and the filtering and screening work.
Yeah, precisely. So it's one of those things where haste makes waste, right? So don't do that. Like don't do that. So what I would say is like if you get caught in a riff, take through the following weekend before you do anything. Don't do anything until the Monday after you get done. Take some time to decompress, spend some time with your family, pet your dog, scream into a pillow, get all the things set up that you need to get set up to start moving, like decompress, figure out, like start figuring out what you want to do and go, so that you can move into a targeted search as opposed to, starting with haste. And then as far as like, the embarrassment or the aspect of it, 9 times out of 10, it's not your fault if you got caught in a riff, right? If it was your fault, you had been terminated a different way. Usually packages for a reduction in force are more generous than packages are for, regrettable attrition, right? Figure out who you need to tell and who you need to tell in what order you need to tell them in. Unsolicited advice, think about telling your partner and or spouse first, and then move out into your close friends and I would kind of move through your close friends who can't help you into your close friends who potentially can help you, right? Most people have an idea of that, right? So, like, Ed, for example, is a close friend who potentially could give me a lead on a job. He's probably in the top 5 people I'll tell if I get caught in a riff, but he's like fourth or fifth on that because I want to get a couple of reps on the story first before I frame it to somebody who can have, an impact on my career, right? Because you do want to kind of move that out. And then also be really careful about like how you go about this on social media, how you go about this in more public spaces, right? Just like it's a bad look to go on a first date and talk about how all of your exes were crazy. It's a bad look to speak poorly of the organization that you left in any way, shape, or form, right? Because people are going to think, well, that's how you're going to talk about us when you leave us, further on in the future, right? And people are going to be looking for social skills, empathy, professionalism overall. A lot of people who are way more involved in this than I will have different recommendations as far as like the LinkedIn open to work banner and the efficacy of that versus the, cloyingness of it. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I've got some strong opinions, but also my default setting is to keep my head low and move in a serpentine pattern.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I know we could deep dive on so many of these topics and really talk in depth about them. So we'll try to keep it relatively high level. But certainly, if you're listening and you're going through this right now and you're looking for advice, we'd be happy to help you out as best as we can if you want to reach out. So we won't try to dive too deep. I will just before we kind of move on here. But one more thing in regards to LinkedIn is I do think I think there's a temptation to think that you can post that you have lost your job and are now open to work and something will just fall into your lap. And
It will not.
it probably won't. It's possible, right? It is technically possible that if you have a big enough network and enough connections and the timing is just right and kismet is perfect and all of that stuff, that you could post that right when your, favorite former boss happens to have an opening who's able to hire you and all of that stuff. But realistically, it's the shotgun approach of just like, hey, I'm looking for work is going to be very hit or miss. And I guess it'll be because of a few things we'll talk about in a minute. But I do want to close the loop before we move on about this, like this temptation to panic or scramble. It is a known psychological trap. Organizational psychologists use something called the Bridges transition model. And that model says that before you can start a new beginning, you literally have to process the ending. If you skip the grieving part and the decompressing part, what Andy and I have been talking about, like just taking that time off, taking the rest of the week, the weekend off, if you skip it, you can wind up carrying any anger, desperation, depression, cognitive dissonance into your interviews, into the stuff you do next. So taking the time to process it and let it go can help you a lot. Where if you don't, you may think, oh, I'm doing a great job of masking that I'm angry about this, but hiring managers, recruiters will be able, they might not know what is going on, but they will be able to tell that something is off and you won't be putting your best foot forward. So really
Yeah,
do that close.
the rent is going to come no matter what. It's a matter of like, is the rent on that frustration gonna, are you gonna pay it when you're prepared to, or when it comes and surprises you?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about what comes next. So you've decompressed. Hopefully the panic has settled, or you're at least able to use some of the tools we talked about in mental fitness to manage it and kind of have it under control for you. And now it's time to actually start doing something. So what do you do, or what comes next? And I guess I wanted to lead into this section by just pointing out that the reality of all of this is your financial runway will dictate your stress level throughout this process. If you have a lot of
It,
savings and you don't have debt,
it'll be the primary driver, if not
yeah,
the exclusive driver of your stress levels.
yeah. If you have lots of savings and very little debt, then you have leverage that you can say no to jobs that you don't like. You can take longer to apply, to decompress and then apply. You can take longer to accept and pick the right job. You can practice more in interviews. But if you don't have financial runway, or you have responsibilities, people that you take care of, debts to pay off, a mortgage to pay, which is going to be the vast majority of us, then you need to just be aware of that and where that stress level is taking you, because sometimes we do need to find and take a job to have a job to pay the bills. And sometimes it's
Mhm.
okay, even if you have a short runway, sometimes it's better to say no and look for that next better job. But you need to figure out where that right balance is, and make sure that you figure out what works for you, and where you should say no versus where you should say yes, even if you're not so sure, because there is a reality to some of this, that the perfect job might not be out there right now. It might not be open right now, or you may not be the right candidate right now. So sometimes you may, I would never tell anyone to set their sights low and just take the first thing that comes across your desk out of panic or desperation. But I do think, and I do generally encourage people to reach further and try to push themselves. But the reality is, if you're out of work and you don't have um, when you're looking for a job and you're employed, uh, you do have more
You have
ownership
leverage.
and leverage. Whereas when you don't, you don't. So just something to
Yeah.
acknowledge right away.
And Ed, I'm just going to get concrete on that. So I know this conversation is aimed at people who were just given that bad news, but my suspicion is that many folks are at risk, right, in one way or another, and this is something you might be listening to, um, you know, hoping that you don't get laid off. So as far as like building a safety net and building a cushion, and every family, every household is different. You can find great recommendations out there from like actual certified financial professionals. I really like the systems that the Money Guy, for example, sets up. I think that they're very concrete about it. But the broad goal should be, or the broad guidance should be, about 6 months of your run rate, whatever you spend monthly, times six in accessible savings for any given family. Now that might change depending on if you're a single income or a dual income household, what the split is across those incomes, right? If you're a 50-50 split or an 80-20 split, as well as other pieces that might be constraints. So like we have a friend, former colleague, whose family has quite expensive healthcare costs. So he needs to consider, the duration of Cobra and what it would cost to cover Cobra at any given point, because that would be catastrophic to his family. So somebody like him might be looking at a much larger, money on the under the mattress fund than somebody who's in a dual income household where it's a 50-50 split, and they're they could cover their run rate on one of those salaries, which was a position that I was in the last time I was on the job hunt. But you want to think about that. If you're gainfully employed but you're afraid of being laid off, the best way to allay those fears is to build yourself a significant nest egg in cash. And I don't mean literally dollars under the mattress, but like put it in a high yield savings account. You'll be fine. That's almost every financial advisor would agree with that. And also make sure that you have the other just like broad systems set up, right? When you get laid off, 9 times out of 10, your laptop gets bricked almost immediately and is entirely useless. So like make sure that you have a computer in your house that you could do a Zoom call on, and where you have access to things like Office Suite or Google Docs or something similar like that to create your collateral with. Otherwise, you're going to get laid off and then immediately be out a significant sum of cash just to have computer access to do the necessary work of applying for a job.
Yeah. Well, you just reminded me too, if make sure that you're storing your contact information for people outside of the work tenant, because if your
Mhm.
only source of contact information is, Outlook inside of your company, then that gets shut down and you won't be able to reach out to anybody. which is
Mhm.
the next point of kind of the most important. The financial runway is a big deal, but I think the next most important piece at this stage would be your network. You really need to leverage your network, and I the intent of this episode, we were kind of back and forth a little bit, because on the one hand, the idea of, so you've been laid off, now what, directed at people who have been laid off and want to listen to this episode, and we wanted to give concrete advice and guidance for what to do in the moment. And as we were talking through it, we realized a lot of the advice is hard to do once you've already been laid off. So,
Mhm.
I don't.
It's like planting a tree, right? The best time to do it was 20 years ago, and the next best time is now.
Yeah. So if you're listening and you've been laid off and you don't have financial runway and you don't have a great network, like, don't take this as an, admonishment or anything like that. Um, it's all learning experience. Like, I didn't know this stuff back in the day either. It took me a long time. If you're listening to this in the hopes that you can do some things to prepare yourself in the future, then I think either way we have some good advice here. But um, going back to the network, so leverage your network. I know earlier we said don't panic, spread this and reach out to people immediately, but you also, I think a lot of people do get embarrassed, or they don't want to share that they've been laid off, and they don't want to look for help, or they want to do it all in isolation or by themselves. And that's not the most effective way to be successful here either. You have to reach out and tell people. As Brene Brown says, vulnerability is courage. So you have to be courageous and you have to be vulnerable and you have to tell people. And sometimes you'll tell people who have nothing to do with your career, and they may just, be able to sympathize or empathize with you and commiserate with you and have a drink with you, and that's great. Some people, though, that you tell, they might have leads. They might have job openings at their company, or they know somebody who does, or they have a friend who has a friend who would be a great person for you to talk to. Maybe, for all you know, if you've been doing great work with great people, maybe there's somebody who's been waiting for you to be available to have, and they have, potentially a job open or could create a job for you. You never know what is happening in your network. Maybe a friend of yours, their dad, is hiring at a company that would be perfect fit for you.
Mhm.
You just have to strip away the embarrassment. You need to share it with people. Don't do it in a vacuum. But I'm also going to say, on the other side, this is where some of this gets a little, we have to find the right balance. Because like we said with the financial runway, if you don't have financial runway and you're out of a job, you can't just suddenly have 6 months worth of savings saved up. If you haven't been leveraging your network or interacting with your network for years, it can be risky for your very first message out to people to be, hey, I'm looking for work. I lost my job and I'm looking for work, because it basically it kind of gives that impression that you're only reaching out because you need something and you wouldn't have otherwise. So if you're in that space where you're laid off and you need help, I'm not saying don't reach out to people. Just be mindful about how you do it and try to be tactful. If you're in a
Mhm.
situation where you can start working on your network now, do that. Like, really, if you're not at risk of being laid off, that's the best time to work on your network. That's the best time to reach out to people to see how you can help them, what they might need. Maybe there's other people who are out there in the situation we're talking about who have just been laid off, and maybe you can be the connector or the super communicator for them and help get them
Mhm.
hooked up and connected with somebody else. And there's really a like, you should be trying to give to your network as much as you can, so that when you need something, that hopefully your network is there to be able to give back to you. So those are some of my initial thoughts.
Yeah.
Anything you'd want to add in terms of the support
Yeah.
system?
It's also a matter of, like, with your network, be specific, right? So, like, I think it's fine after, a little bit of time to, like, write the, like, hey, I'm on the market, open to work post. Ideally, try to pair that with, like, some thought leadership, or some things that you've been thinking about, right? I think it's useful, like try to give, if you're gonna put, like, a public post out there. Don't just be like, I'm looking for work, does anyone have a job? Like, try to share your skill set, with your network, provide some thought leadership. I've seen a lot of folks doing this, and it lands pretty well. If you're going to go into the practice of, like, DMing people, especially people you maybe haven't talked to in a while, make sure you're doing it with a specific reason, and think to yourself, like, would I pick up the phone if this person called me, right? Or do I think that they are likely to pick up the phone if I called them? And like use that as like, hey Ed, I saw that there is this role at Ed Incorporated. I'm looking, I'm looking at new roles right now. You don't need to over explain like, hey, I got caught in a riff and I'm desperate or anything like that. Would you mind, like, would you be able to make an intro to the hiring manager or provide a referral or anything like that, right? So try to, don't just be like, hey Ed, I'm outdoors. It's not very helpful, it's not very actionable. And like if you're the recipient of that note, you're just like, what do I do with
Yeah.
this? But if I get a note that's like, hey, I saw that this job posting existed, it fits my skill set for XYZ reasons, would you be willing to like give it a nudge or a referral? 9 times out of 10 people are going to do that. Heck, I do that for like third connections. If I find out that like Ed worked with somebody that I worked with 3 jobs ago and has companies that I know and respect on their resume, and there's an opening at my organization that is in line with Ed's last job, like I'll call the recruiter. It costs me nothing to be like, hey, recruiter, this person reached out to me. They seem pretty cool. I can do a bit of a reference check, but like, could you check out their like, could you put their resume at the top of the pile of like ones that actually get read? You know, it's, if anything, it builds my relationship with the recruiter too. Right. So think in that, in those terms, if you're going to ask things of people, because more often than not, people who are afraid to ask don't realize like how little of a request it actually is, or they're just like framing the request in a way that the recipient of that request is just like, dude, what the heck do I do with this?
Yeah. And one other thing I was thinking about in terms of your network and the professional communities and things that you might be a part of is think try to be mindful and thoughtful and have some self-awareness about your interaction with those communities, because something you may think that nobody will notice or it's not going to be an indicator of anything, but if you only show up at a professional community when you're in between jobs and you're looking for work, or you only volunteer for something because you're looking for work right now, or you only reach out to people because you're looking for work right now, it may not always be a deal breaker or may not always hurt your chances, but people will start to notice that pattern. And I can say, as someone who's been part of professional communities and gone every week or every month and helped to host things and participate in everything, it is very noticeable when someone starts to show up once they got laid off, and then as soon as they have a new job, they disappear again. And I think that it is something just to be considerate of, like, what kind of impression are you giving and putting out there based on your interactions with people? Are you trying to give more than you get, or are you giving that impression that you're just trying to take and not really contributing back, unless you need something? And those would be some things also to think about. So I know
Yeah,
Andy,
100%.
Andy, when you went through a transition with between jobs, I remember you actively used a framework called Never Search Alone, where you built a peer support group. And I'm curious, what was the biggest difference between doing a job search council versus just sitting alone at your computer and submitting resumes?
Um, it was night and day. And, in hindsight, right, you and I both got caught in the same riff, right? And this was what we were talking about before, previous episode where we had some garden leave and then severance and whatnot. And during that garden leave, we kind of had created something similar to a job search council in the sense that like there was a cohort of us that were all looking for roles simultaneously, and the difference was that we were all looking for really similar roles at the same time, whereas these job search councils, which is from Never Search Alone, they actually pair people geographically for the most part, just for time zone alignment, with no real concern over what type of roles that they're looking for. And there were a handful of things that were really, really critical about it. One, just to be super blunt, searching for a job is awful. It's a lot of rejection. It's a lot of headaches. that go back and forth. It's a real pain in the neck. And it's just difficult to deal with it, right? And when you're doing that with a group of people, you've got kind of a safe space to share those frustrations. So you're not just, finishing your interviews or getting another rejection letter that's automated by some service and getting angry and scolding your kids or kicking your dog or whatever whatever it is. um so that was super helpful. And then also, like, the never search alone piece, it's super structurally laid out as far as like, do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. You do this week over week over week. And some of the things feel maybe a little bit unnatural, right? When you're reaching out to your network to look for various roles, right? Or you're building out like a one pager to determine your candidate market fit, right? Like sometimes these things feel a little bit hokey or cheesy or whatever, but there's an earnestness when you do that with the group. And if you're like me, where you're maybe reluctant to like reach out to your network, having a concrete goal of like reaching out to X number of recruiters and Y number of former colleagues over the next week, and then talking about it with your cohort at the end of the week, becomes this forcing function that's just really, really critical to like get those sorts of things done, right? There's this kind of mutual accountability aspect of it that just makes the whole system a lot easier and makes it just like way, way, way less lonely.
Yeah, that's great. It did sound like it was a pretty powerful tool. I think that community aspect can be huge because I mean, like the title implies, you're not searching alone, so you're not by yourself, which can be really helpful. It makes you know that you're in it with other people. And I think also the whole what we were talking about before, where it can get you into like a hidden job market. Because if you're just hitting easy apply on LinkedIn, your resume just goes into a black hole with, 2,000 other people and 2,000 other resumes. But if you have networking conversations or, if you're running into problems with how your interviews are going, maybe an outside person can give you some perspective that you're missing or some viewpoint that you're not quite seeing. Or you might be able to even have some people vouch for you who you didn't know before. So I think the idea of hunting for a job with other people is pretty interesting. And if presumably the next time I'm in that situation, I hope not to be, but maybe I should say when and not if. You never know these days. I think doing something like a job search council sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, and I would even use it, like that system if I were earnestly looking for a role while still gainfully employed. And a lot of it's because like the system itself clearly works and it's been pressure tested. But it's also that like by working with a cohort, you you've got people to gut check your things, right? You've got five or six other people who can review your resume and give you notes, right? Or who you're going to talk about your wins and losses with as you're competing in the job market and talking to various organizations, and who can give you some different feedback that you might not have otherwise, and really like narrow down the field of your scope, narrow down what you're looking for, and help you keep your head above water as you just like navigate what is just a really challenging thing to do, like finding a job, whether you're finding a job to deliberately move on from the role you're currently in, or because you don't have one and you need to get yourself a job. It's super hard. And I think we just need to acknowledge that it's super hard, and it takes a village, and that's okay.
Yeah. All right, so let's get to the strategy. So you've decompressed, you have your head right, you've activated your network. So how do you actually execute the mechanics of finding a job and getting hired? And you kind of touched on this earlier. I think you were setting me up for this segment here, but
Mhm.
it's the cascade of goals. And I think what happens a lot of times is that people will get overwhelmed because they think that the point of each of the things that they're doing is to get a job. But the point of a lot of the steps isn't to get a job. Each step has its own sort of point or outcome that you're moving towards, right? So to break it down, and I don't know if cover letters are in vogue or not anymore, but if we break it down and walk through it, the goal of a cover letter is just to get your resume read. That is it. Because if you have a decent enough cover letter, and assuming they read cover letters these days, then you get your resume read. And I guess we could argue the same thing could be said of like the application, right? Like filling out one of those application systems or whatever. The only point of filling that out is in the hope that it'll surface to them and get your resume read, or maybe your cover letter read, depending on how they sequence things. And then, so if your cover letter works and they read your resume, the goal of your resume is just to get you an interview. That is it. Like Andy said earlier,
Mhm.
it is not your whole career delta file. It's not everything that you've ever done, or every experience you've had, or every skill or accomplishment or responsibility you've ever had. It is a marketing document to try to get you an interview for this specific job. And
Mhm.
I
And
go ahead.
And I want to, yeah, and I just want to pause here because, right, these are the two, like, this is tip of the spear, right? This is top of the funnel if you're going to think in the context of like sales and marketing, which is what we are doing. Like, let's just be concrete. Applying for a job is a sales and marketing endeavor, right? Trying to get a job is closing a deal, it's a sales and marketing motion. And this is all top of funnel sorts of things, right? Um, Ed, do you remember what your response rate was on job applications the last time you applied?
Um, oh, I don't remember for sure, but I mean, I guess I should preface by saying we were when we were doing it, we were in a really, really strong market for candidates. Uh, so I think my response rate was probably, I think it was pretty high. I think my response rate was probably nearing into 50% territory. I might have been like 40 to 50%, on the low end, maybe 35%. But that felt pretty high of a response rate compared to what I had experienced in the past, where sometimes the response rate was maybe in the 10% or 15% if I was really lucky range. In some those cases, that wasn't when I was laid off. That was just when I was looking for new job opportunities. But yeah, I mean, so maybe 50% on the very upper end would be kind of optimistic, I think.
Yeah, so I'm looking through my data right now, and take this with a bit of a grain of salt, because I'm not sure I trust all of my math. But across, and I keep a master spreadsheet for all of this. Across all of the job searches I've done since 2016, I'm batting at about 10 to 15% interview rate, right? Depending on kind of how you parse it out. Some of my data is not super clean. I'm only hitting 50% response rate, period. Right. So that means that 50% of the roles that I've applied to over that time frame, I've gotten zero response back. You just apply, it goes into a black hole, and you never hear anything. The highest was, yeah, that 21, 22, I think, right, where we were out at the same point. And I think I had about a 30% interview rate for them. That was a super duper strong market. I think everyone out of our cohort was fielding multiple offers at that same time, but that was 21, 22. That was, if you stepped outside, you got 7 job offers. In the current marketplace, I would expect, if you're in double digit percent of response rate, like not response rate, like recruiter interview, rate. So if 1 out of every 10 applications you send out gets a response, your resume is doing its job. So the reason I want to call that out and bring some data into it is I think people will often navel gaze on the resume a bit too much, and expect to get a callback rate that's just unrealistic in the marketplace. So like if you're getting better than 1 out of 10 response, like positive response that's leading to a hiring man or not a hiring manager, a recruiter screen interview, your resume is doing its job. Stop focusing on your resume.
Yeah. I mean, I would probably still keep refining resumes. I know the advice is always mixed on if you know, how do you, are you customizing for every job you apply to, or using ones that are maybe slightly customized? I don't want to get into that stuff today. Maybe that's a future as a episode for resume discussion. Um, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
if you are getting responses, then that is a pretty good indicator that your resume is working. If you're getting responses you don't like, then that might be an indicator your resume needs some work to try to get the types of jobs that you're looking for. If you're not getting any at all, then maybe there could be a slew of things that would be contributing to the lack of response rate.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the reason I want to kind of break it down is like it's worth breaking these things down into phases, right? So like every job that you interview for or apply for has a handful of stages that you're going to go through, right? It's do you get the first interview or not, which is binary. Do you get passed on to the hiring manager or not? Do you like if there's a panel or whatever, there's usually multiple interviews, and then eventually it's do you get an offer or not? Um, and the reason I wanted to encourage people to think about it in these various stages is you want to figure out if you're not getting jobs, if you're not getting offers, you want to figure out where the system is broken and kind of what the expectation should be like through that, through those conversations, through what you're doing, so that you can then refine and work on the part that's you're working out. So if you're getting a whole bunch of recruiter screens, but you're not getting to the hiring manager, your interview skills are probably something that you want to work on. If you're not getting that first interview, then it's a resume problem, it's a marketing problem. So I just want to make sure that people are focusing on where the breakdown is and what's causing the slowdown in their pipeline as you apply for things. So you're putting your effort in the correct place as opposed to just flailing and trying to fix everything at once.
Yeah. So just to reiterate for folks, and I'm not sure if I finished the whole flow or not, but just think about it one step, one chunk at a time. You're not writing a cover letter so that you can get the job. You're not writing the cover letter so that you need to be worried about if you would relocate for the job or not. Those are future step problems. You write the cover letter to get your resume read. That's it. Cover letter markets your resume. Resume markets you so you can get an interview. The goal of the interview is just to get a job offer, because once you get an offer, once you have an offer in hand, then the ball is finally back in your court. But until you have an
Mhm.
offer, the ball is in their court, and you need to be doing the right things and positioning yourself or framing yourself in a way that will help you move forward through those steps in that process. So if you're not hearing anything back at all, check your applications and your cover letter. If you are maybe getting an initial an initial response, but then nothing after that, maybe your resume is not good enough to get you into the full interview. So maybe look at it that way. If you are getting into those screener interviews or initial interviews, but not going beyond that, focus on your resume or your interview skills, like Andy was saying. And if you're finding that you're getting, like, if you keep getting further and further along in the process before it breaks down and you're not making more progress, evaluate what you can do differently at that step to try to keep helping you move forward. And your goal is to get offers. It's not to get a job, it's just to get offers, because then you get to pick. You can decide to turn down an offer, you can decide to accept an offer, you can try to negotiate on an offer. But until you have an offer, you don't really have much of anything. Um, the other piece,
100%.
so that's in terms of the actual mechanics of the application. But I do want to zoom in just a little bit into the building blocks of the resume or how you talk about stuff. Um, think about it in terms of building blocks for a resume. If you do it that way, you can customize your experience for each role without it being a huge heavy lift where you're needing to rewrite the entire resume from scratch all of the time. And if you use things like both when you're thinking about your resume, if you think about your responsibilities and your accomplishments for putting those in your resume, that can be really good marketing for getting you in the door and getting more information. And then think about using things like the STAR method for your preparation, the situation, the task, the action, the result. So before you go into the resume or into the interview, Be prepared. They're going to ask you questions about your accomplishments or things you called out in the resume. If you are already prepared to think about the situation where that occurred, the task that you were doing, the action that you took, and the result that you got out of it, you are now able to tell a clean story about your accomplishments so that people can, they can know that you are competent and that you will be able to do the job based on your experience. Make sure you're thinking about things that way. An awesome tip that I heard a long time ago, and this might be more in, down the road if we do a deep dive into resumes and preparing for interviews and stuff. But a great tip I heard was get a bunch of 3x5 cards and make one stack where you put potential interview questions. It could be questions that you get all the time. Maybe you ask ChatGPT or Claude or something. What are common interview questions? I know there's a lot of like interview question books for specific roles or things like that. So you could collect them from there. Or you might have, maybe you've interviewed before and you could just use ones that you've used, but you make a stack of questions that you're likely to get asked in the interview, then make a stack of 3x5 cards with accomplishments from your past jobs or your most relevant jobs, and then just randomly pick two, one of each. Pick an interview question, pick a random accomplishment, and then just practice answering that interview question using that accomplishment and your STAR method as your example. And you'll basically be building the muscle and the tool set to be able to respond to any question, be able to pull stories out of your brain and share them with people and give examples of the things that you've learned and the successes that you've had to really show your competency. So I think those are some really useful tips for getting started. But I'm curious, Andy, when people have been out of work for a couple months, the fear can really start to set in. How do you stop yourself from setting your sights too low or accepting a title that is a massive step backwards just out of fear?
Yeah, and I think it comes down to like how much leverage and how much runway you have for yourself. So, and what you're trying to do, right? Like it it's scary to be out of work. You know, if you're fortunate enough to be out of work but not running out of money, it's less scary, but it's still scary. And the trade-off that people seem to be thinking is like, if I don't get a job, I'm never going to get a job, right? If I don't take this job or if I don't set my sights a little bit lower, I'm never going to work again. And that's unrealistic, assuming that your sights are set appropriately, right? So, like, if you are getting interviews and you're getting deep into interviews, maybe you're the runner up a couple of times. Unfortunately, being a silver medalist in this particular competition, you walk away with nothing. But you usually, then you've got validation that you are directionally correct in what you were applying for and that you are competent to do that. And it's really important to lean on those accomplishments and continue to work the system. If you're getting no bites, then you probably do have to lower your sights, right? Especially if you've been getting no bites for an extended period of time. That's probably more indicative of where you think you are in the market is not where the market thinks you are. Which again, another shout out for Phil and his Never Search Alone job search councils. They do a really good job of helping you figure out where the intersection of market needs and candidate capabilities are. The other thing that I would really recommend in this is, like, as you said, your goal is to get job offers. It's not to get a job, right? Job offers are a leading indicator of getting a job. Another thing to think about is, like, how can you break your system down into all of its component parts? So, like, look, eventually everyone runs out of money, right? Unemployment only lasts for 26 weeks, right? Your severance package has its limit on it, right? No matter how much you have in savings, it's still finite unless you've truly hit your FU numbers. But let's assume that you've got a little bit of runway and a little bit of leverage. Focus on the mechanisms, focus on the day to day, right? Did you apply to jobs today, right? Did you apply to the number of jobs that you set for yourself? So, like, when I've been looking, I set a daily quota because that keeps me honest and it keeps me online. So every day I apply to XYZ number of jobs. Sometimes I know that I'm just putting garbage into my pipeline, but it allows me to continue momentum when I'm going through that. Um, and also have other things that you're doing, right? So, figure out what it is that you're going to do with your time so that you feel like you're continuing to move the ball down the floor, the field, right? So that's probably applying for a certain number of jobs, right? Maybe that's posting something on LinkedIn, maybe that's learning a new skill, maybe that's taking advantage of time that you might not have otherwise. I don't know if we talked about this on this particular, definitely not on this episode, but on previous ones. But like the last time that I was unemployed, I was super fortunate in that I didn't have meaningful financial constraints forcing me to rejoin the work force immediately. So we pulled my kids out of daycare for several days a week, and I focused on being, part-time stay-at-home dad for an extended period of time, and I got an invaluable amount of time with my super young kids. There's other stuff that you can do with your time to keep yourself occupied and to feel like you're adding value and living a life that's meaningful outside of work. So make sure that you're finding those sorts of things and continue to work the system.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And, I think something to think about with this is hopefully if you're listening to this, you're not in the situation of having just been laid off and you have some time to start preparing your systems and getting yourself set up for if, when, or if it inevitably happens. Because the best time to do all of the stuff we're talking about is before you get laid off. If you're already networking, if you're already volunteering, if you're already keeping a private list of accomplishments, if you're already doing all of this stuff and probably more that we couldn't even think to talk about today because there is so many pieces to this, then a layoff, it just becomes an inconvenience as opposed to a horrible turn of events in life. And one of the things also to think about is, um, I'll use an analogy here. Some people love Christmas, right? But Christmas only comes once a year. And if I love Christmas and I want to make Christmas really awesome and I want to decorate and I want to have it be a great time and I want Christmas Day to be amazing, I only get one time a year to try to make it great. And because of that, I'm stressed every year trying to make Christmas great because I only get one shot a year. If we treat searching for a job like I only search when I am out of a job, when I got laid off or fired or something, or I only look when I'm so fed up and tired with my existing job that I desperately need to look for a new job, then every time that you write a resume or apply or go in for an interview, it's going to feel like that once a year Christmas. And it might be even worse. It might not even be once a year, right? Some people work at a job for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years before they ever interview again. And then it becomes a big deal, a big stressor, and something that you're not prepared, not as well prepared for as you could otherwise be. And that's why I do encourage, if you're in a position right now to do so, and you don't think that you need to look for a job, you might want to polish your resume anyway. And you might want to go look on Indeed or LinkedIn Jobs and see what's out there. What kind of jobs might you be interested in if something were to happen? What would you qualify for? Maybe throw your resume out there on a couple of them and apply and see what happens. Because even if you're like, I'm not going to change jobs, my job is awesome. If every job that you interview that you take, the pay is worse, the benefits are worse, and the company's worse, you're still practicing at interviewing and you're still getting those reps in of like, how do I do my resume? What kind of jobs do I look for? How do I actually go to an interview and participate in it? You don't ever have to say yes, right? The worst thing that could happen is you interview and you don't hear back. Or I guess if you're not trying to change jobs, the worst thing that can happen is you get a job offer and then you get to say no. And if the worst thing that's happening to you is you have a job offer on the table, then that's pretty good. That's a much better position to be in than not having one or needing to hunt for a job offer. So, the point of all of this is just to say, if you wait until you get locked out of your laptop to remember what you did for the last 3 years, that's a crisis. But if you already work on tracking those things and having that information available, then you're in a much better position to, to deal with the unexpected if or when it should arise for you. So how can we make this practical? Let's talk about Monday morning application. So if someone's listening to this and maybe you're employed, or maybe you just got bad news yesterday, what should you do? Here's my top three that I would put out there. Number one is some sort of an accomplishment tracker or a career delta file. If you are currently unemployed, or if you're currently employed, start a Google Doc or a Word doc in your personal space today. And once a week, maybe on Fridays before you sign off for the week, write down some of your measurable metrics that you improved, a project that you shipped, a piece of praise that you got, some positive feedback, maybe even some constructive feedback, whatever it might be. If you get locked out of your laptop tomorrow, at least you have data that you can use for your resume and it's safe and sound. If you are in the bad news position where you're looking for work right now, do this, take this step, especially if you have the time while you're looking for work. Go sit down and make a plan. Go through all the jobs that you've ever had and make a list of them, who it was with, what years it was, what was the job title, what did you do for that job. And you can just start there. Just make that initial list of what jobs you've had, and then carve out maybe an hour for each one and go back through and just brain dump everything that you can remember. What were my responsibilities? What were my accomplishments? What did we ship? What did we do? What meetings did I lead? What did I learn? How did I grow in this role? How did I develop? You probably won't be able to remember everything if it's been years ago. But if you aren't keeping one of these now, the best place to start is by just go back to the first job that you ever had, put down as much information as you can remember, and then slowly move through all the jobs until you're at your present day. If you're employed, once you hit present day, start documenting day to day what's happening. If you're unemployed, you have all of this data now that you can use to help you figure out what types of jobs you should apply to or what you should put on your resume, what accomplishments you should track, what you might want to talk about in the interview. So I think the accomplishment tracker or the career delta file is one of the most important things that you should be doing today. Number two, we already kind of talked about this, but a 48-hour broadcast ban, at least, maybe even 72 hours. If you do get laid off, do not post on LinkedIn for at least 48 hours. Secure your severance documents, file for unemployment if you're eligible, go take a walk, see a movie, play a game, play with your kids, walk your dogs, hug your wife or your partner. Just let the emotional shock pass before you broadcast your brand and what your needs are to the world. And number three is define your must-haves. Before you apply for a single job, write down the difference between a make ends meet job and your dream job. Define your salary floor and your non-negotiables so you don't negotiate against yourself in a panic. Even doing this, sure, it's possible you may have to take a job you wouldn't otherwise take, but at least you know what the what the considerations are, what the concerns might be, where it's going to be valuable or not so valuable. But if you can see that delta between, this is what I'm willing to do so I can pay the bills, and this is what I would ideally be doing if I could get any job that I wanted to, I think that can help you set your targets so that you're not shooting too low. But also helping you to not shoot too high and helping you to kind of aim for the right spot and then figure out where you can lower your aim to if you're not able to get that dream job as quickly as you need to. So Andy, looking over those three, is there any of those you think is hardest for people to actually follow through on? And is there anything else that you would add?
Yeah, I mean, I think taking the pause is probably the hardest thing. And I would encourage, like, as I said before, not just 72 hours, just whatever day it is that you get the news, wait till the following Monday. I know it's going to feel super urgent and super important to get out there and to post and to feel like you've got some motion and progress. Take that time to start working on your resume, right? Be a little bit stealth. It'll benefit you in the long run. That way, when you're shooting your shots, you're adequately prepared to actually take them. The other thing that I would do is I would set up, if you're entering a job search, whether it's voluntarily or involuntarily, set yourself up an application tracker for that. I have one that I built that was modeled after a friend of mine's that basically functions like a you know poorly built CRM, right? Customer relationship management tool. But track, like, make sure that you're putting in a spreadsheet somewhere every role that you applied to, when you applied to it, whether or not you heard back, right? Try to track all of that data. So like mine, I just pulled it up here. The stages go from applied, recruiter screen, hiring manager screen, a loop, right? So just the broader interviews, an offer, dormant, so whether or not it's been 30 days or more since they last contacted me, or an open rejection. And that allows you to track the whole of your funnel, which will help you troubleshoot where things are going wrong and actually have concrete data to play with, right? If you know that, like, if you don't know how many jobs you've applied to, you don't know what your hit rate is on your resume. So
Yeah.
you don't know if your resume is performing at, below, or above average. So you don't know if that's somewhere where you need to focus your energy. And same thing with every other stage across that process. So data's your friend. Build yourself a tracker. Make sure that you're diligent about keeping that updated. That way, when you go through your search, you can treat it like a job. And I don't mean, spend 8 hours searching for a job. That's insane. Don't do that. But treat it with the same professionalism that you would treat anything else that you were getting paid for, because you were trying to get paid for this.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to wrap up today. Getting laid off is a massive, stressful disruption, but it does not define your worth or your capability. The key to surviving it is moving from a reactive state of panic into a proactive state of strategy. Give yourself the grace to process the ending, rely on your community so you never search alone, and treat your job hunt with the same exact professionalism you treated your last job. Here are your 2 challenges for this week. First, if you are employed, do the proactive work. Reach out to one person in your network this week just to say hello, not to ask for a job. Start your career Delta file. Start tracking your accomplishments and the things that you do day to day. Build the foundation so that you don't collapse when you need it. Build the roof before it rains. Second, if you are currently in the transition, give yourself permission to truly disconnect for one afternoon this week. You cannot strategize effectively if you're running on empty. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. If you've been through a layoff, what was the one thing that helped you regain your confidence? And what is your best tip for standing out in a crowded job market? You can email us at leadershipexplored@gmail.com or connect with us on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear your stories or ideas for topics you'd like us to explore. If you found this conversation helpful, please make sure to follow the show, leave a review, or share it with someone who might be navigating a career transition right now. We release new episodes every other Tuesday. Until next time, keep leading with purpose.